program in '81, I thought it was doing very well. It hadn't achieved its ultimate purpose yet, but it was making progress, and I think it was making progress because we stuck religiously to nuts and bolts remote viewing. If it got into trouble after that, I think it was because it may have branched into other phenomena that were less utilitarian for the Army.
After General Thompson moved to another posting, the main supporter of remote viewing in the Army was Major General Albert Stubblebine, head of the Army's Intelligence and Security Command. Stubblebine was highly enthusiastic about remote viewing, but his enthusiasm expanded to include other paranormal possibilities. He was given the nickname Spoonbender after a series of sessions with his senior officers in which they all tried to use psychokinesis, mind over matter, to bend cutlery. John Alexander was one of the staff officers closest to Stubblebine.
Well, we had seen on a number of occasions what we'd call macro psychokinesis, where major events occurred in front of us. And what I brought along are two forks. And what we would do is have individuals hold these, as I am now, one in each hand, where there's no physical force available. Now, these two forks used to sit snugly next to each other. And what was happening is that we had a group of colonels and generals mostly. An individual, totally untrained, was holding this, turned his head, and when he did, this particular fork dropped a full 90 degrees. And then with everybody watching, this same fork came back up, went down, and came back to the position that it's in now. Again, about 30 highly qualified witnesses, and as you can see from this, they're distinctly different, and no physical force. And that happened, as I say, witnessed by many qualified observers. Well, one of the things that people used to ask me about, say, what are you going to do, bend tank barrels? And I said, well, no, that's ridiculous. But what you can do, I think, is to impact electronics and things of that nature, where rather than moving large amounts of physical matter, you're talking about electrons.
Stubblebine also believed that such demonstrations would shake up the worldviews of his fellow officers. In other words, being confronted by the paranormal would keep them intellectually on their toes. Instead, it seemed to knock Stubblebine off his feet.
There was a sense that General Stubblebine had lost his balance, and lost his balance and perspective, and that there might be a psychological flaw that might result in a poor decision or a catastrophic decision on his part, strategically and tactically. General Stubblebine was responsible for upwards of 30,000 men and women in positions worldwide, so this was not consistent with his responsibilities.
Stubblebine resigned in 1984, and the remote viewing unit was expelled from the Army. Although it remained at Fort Meade, it came under the control of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Its new boss was DIA Chief Scientist Jack Verona. A secretive figure, Verona was also influential and respected at the Pentagon and on Capitol Hill. But under his leadership, the remote viewing unit included less structured paranormal pursuits, such as spirit mediumship, also known as channeling.
At least one individual was sent to the unit. Now, this was a civilian-type individual, not military, who supposedly had talent in channeling discarnate entities. Later on, another civilian-type female was hired. If she was given an assignment, she would go sequester herself in the other building and read tarot cards or something and come up with information.
Having to work with tarot card readers and channelers, the witches, as we called them, most of the individuals were female. This was too much to bear for professional military officers. The witches were holding personal sessions, that is, readings, if you would, a la the Madame X readings that you would find in the streets of any city for public officials, congressmen, Jack Verona himself, who was the head of our program.
somebody coined the phrase, and I'm not sure who it was, but they said, well, here comes another one for a psychic blowjob. The reason somebody coined it a psychic blowjob is these people would walk out of there, and these entities would tell them what they wanted to hear, what would make them feel good, of course.
What had happened to Verona and to Stubblebine before him might have seemed shocking, but to remote viewers, exposure to the paranormal was inevitably the start of a personal transformation, a transformation that might lead anywhere.
Some people compare some of their experiences in remote viewing, especially some of the really deep bilocation type experiences where you actually go to a different place. Some people would compare that to a drug-induced altered state. However, there's a big difference. The big difference is that you are always in control when you're remote viewing. Not only that, there are no lasting side effects from remote viewing other than the fact that it may change your whole life and your outlook on the universe, the world, and things around you.
One of Mel Riley's colleagues in the unit was Lynn Buchanan.
One of the minor drawbacks of this, actually it could be major, is that if your spouse, let's say, is not ready to have a new husband, then there may be some marital problems exist in all this. My wife is extremely tolerant of all of this and has stood by me and has probably been the biggest help I've had in all of this. And every now and then, if I sort of go out on a limb personality-wise, she nails me back to the floor and tells me, you know, you're turning into a kook.
I've always needed to keep his feet on the ground. That's been part of my responsibility in the marriage. And there have been times when the task that he was working on at the time would be particularly trying for him, and he would tend to get a little obsessed. There have been times when I would step in and say, this is really getting ridiculous here. As a result of Lynn's being in the remote viewing field, we have become acquainted with a number of people that we surely would not have met otherwise. About a year and a half ago, we attended a convention together, and there were a number of speakers and different ideas that were being presented in the psychic realm. And at the convention, they had a spoon bending or psychokinesis party. And I ended up bending this particular spoon. I even managed to bend the bowl of the spoon, which is supposed to be one of the more difficult things to do because you have to go against the grain of the spoon that's naturally there.
Despite the apparently outrageous possibilities of psychokinesis and remote viewing, the Buchanans seem to maintain a sense of humility, and they gently change together. Other couples weren't so lucky. Ed Dames and his wife are undergoing a divorce.
He became more and more obsessed with it, and then he will he works very hard, low hours, and he warned me that I better change with him or he will leave me behind. He often tells me he's trying to make a dent in history and change mankind. He has big idea. So if I say, well, can't you just do ordinary things? And then he gets real upset with me. He was mostly interested in the extraterrestrial, the ETs. That's his obsession.
I was becoming bored at using the technologies against the normal tactical and strategic military targets. I began to conduct advanced training operations. For instance, determining the location of the Ark of the Covenant, Noah's Ark, purported UFO activity. These were the kinds of things that really were very, very interesting, the spice of life, if you will. What would you do with this information? We couldn't take it to the National Security Council or our superiors because it was bad enough. We were on thin ice enough as it was.